The wind howled through the canyon like a wounded beast, carrying with it the sting of sand and the promise of another harsh winter. Eleanor pressed her palm against the rough wooden wall of their cabin, feeling the tremors as another gust slammed into the weathered boards. Outside, she could hear the familiar sounds of Willow Creek, wagon wheels creaking, horses snorting, men's voices raised in argument over cards at the saloon. But these sounds came to her through a veil of darkness that had been her companion since the fever took her sight 15 winters past. "Eleanor, stop your daydreaming and help your mother with the washing." Her stepfather's voice cut through her thoughts like a rusty blade. Samuel Hartley had married her mother 3 years ago, promising to care for them both. But promises, Eleanor had learned, were as fleeting as morning mist in the desert. She found her way to the wash basin by memory, her fingers trailing along the familiar grooves in the wall. Her mother, Grace, coughed weakly from her bed in the corner. The consumption had taken hold last spring, and each day Eleanor heard her mother's breath grow more labored. "I can manage. Mama," Eleanor called softly, plunging her hands into the cold water. The lye soap burned her chapped skin, but she worked steadily, feeling for stains with practiced fingers. The cabin door burst open, bringing a swirl of dust and the smell of whiskey. Samuel's heavy boots stomped across the floor. "Worthless girl," he muttered, though Eleanor had done nothing to provoke him. "Can't even hang the washing proper like. How's a man supposed to run a household with a blind burden eating up his provisions?" Eleanor bit her tongue, having learned that silence served her better than defiance. She wrung out a shirt, the water dripping steadily onto the packed earth floor. "There's talk in town," Samuel continued, settling heavily into his chair. "The widow Morrison says there's ways to make arrangements. Says there's men out there who might take a wife, even a blind one, if the price is right." Eleanor's hands stilled in the water. Her mother's coughing filled the silence. "Samuel, please," Grace whispered from her bed. "She's just a girl." "Girl's 19 come spring," Samuel shot back. "Most are married with young'uns by now. But who'd want her? Can't cook proper, can't sew straight, can't even see to clean. No man would take the blind bride without good reason." The words hung in the air like smoke from a poorly tended fire. Eleanor resumed her washing, but her mind raced. She'd heard whispers at the general store, when the other women thought she couldn't understand. Arrangements, mail-order brides, men in mining camps or distant homesteads who'd take any woman for any purpose. That evening, as Eleanor helped her mother sip thin broth, she heard Samuel talking low with someone at the door. The visitor's voice was unfamiliar, gravelly like river stones grinding together. "Name's Josiah Pike," the man said. "Got a claim up north, near the Colorado line. Lonely work. The agency said you had a girl." "That I do," Samuel replied, and Eleanor heard the clink of coins. "She's blind, but she's got all her other parts working fine. Strong enough for work. Young enough for whatever you need." Eleanor's stomach turned to ice. She set down the bowl carefully, her hands trembling. "I'd want to see her first," Pike said. "Make sure she's as you say." "Eleanor," Samuel barked. "Come here, girl." She rose slowly, using the wall to guide her path. When she reached the door, she felt the heat of Pike's gaze even through her darkness. "Turn around," Pike commanded. Eleanor stood still. "I said turn. Girl, let me get a look at you." "Do as he says," Samuel growled. Eleanor turned slowly, her chin raised despite the humiliation burning in her chest. She heard Pike's grunt of approval. "She'll do. When can I collect her?" "Soon as you bring the full payment, $50, like we agreed." After Pike left, Eleanor helped her mother to the privy, then sat beside her bed in the darkness. Grace's hand found hers, paper thin and burning with fever. "My sweet girl," her mother whispered. "I'm so sorry. If I were stronger." "Hush, Mama. Rest now." But Eleanor didn't rest. She sat awake long into the night, listening to the wind howl and planning. She knew the land around Willow Creek by sound and smell. The creek that gave the town its name ran east, toward the mountains. The old trapper's trail started behind the church, winding up into the pine forests. She'd walked it once with her father, before the fever, before the darkness. He'd taught her to feel the moss on the north side of trees, to smell the change in wind that meant a storm approaching. 2 nights later, the storm came as she'd sensed it would. Thunder rolled across the valley like cannon fire, and rain lashed the cabin walls. Eleanor lay still, listening to Samuel's snoring and her mother's labored breathing. Then she heard it, low voices outside. Despite the late hour and the weather, she crept to the window, pressing her ear to a gap in the boards. "Tomorrow night," Samuel was saying. "The girl doesn't know. Pike's bringing 2 other men to help manage her. She's got fight in her, even if she can't see." "And the mother?" another voice asked. "Won't last the week. Doc Morrison says the consumption's in her lungs deep. Once she's gone, no one will ask questions about the girl." Eleanor's hands clenched into fists. They were planning to take her tomorrow, like livestock to market. And her mother? She pressed her palm over her mouth to stifle a sob, moving with desperate silence. Eleanor felt her way to the shelf where she kept her few possessions. Her father's old coat, still carrying the scent of pipe tobacco and pine sap. The small bag of coins she'd saved from selling herbs to Doc Morrison. A knife, its handle worn smooth. She bundled these into a cloth, then knelt beside her mother's bed. Grace stirred, her hand reaching out. "Eleanor." "I have to go, Mama," Eleanor whispered, tears flowing freely. "They mean to sell me." "I know, child. I heard." Grace pressed something into Eleanor's hand, a small leather pouch. "Your grandmother's ring, and some money I hid from Samuel. Go to the mountains, like your father taught you. Find your freedom." Eleanor kissed her mother's burning forehead, memorizing the scent of lavender water and illness, love and sorrow. "I love you, Mama. Go now, before the storm passes. Let the rain hide your tracks." Eleanor slipped out the back door into the tempest. The rain struck her face like cold needles, but she welcomed it. The familiar path to the creek was mud beneath her feet, but she knew each stone, each turn, behind her. Willow Creek slept, unaware that their blind burden had slipped her chains. At the creek, she paused, water rushing around her ankles. To the east lay the mountains, dark and unknown. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "The mountains don't care if you can see. Eleanor, they judge you by your courage and your wits." She turned east and began to climb, leaving behind the only world she'd known. The wind tore at her father's coat, and the rain soaked through to her skin. But she pressed on. Somewhere above, beyond the reach of men like Pike and Samuel, lay a freedom she could feel in her bones, as real as the stones beneath her feet, as certain as the darkness that had shaped her into something stronger than they could imagine. Behind her, Willow Creek grew smaller, its lights invisible to her but its weight lifting from her shoulders with each step. She was no longer the blind bride no man would take. She was Eleanor, daughter of the mountains, and she would find her own way or die trying. The storm raged on, but she climbed higher, guided by instinct and memory, hope and desperation. And in the darkness that was both her prison and her power, she felt the first stirrings of something that might have been freedom. The mountain path grew steeper with each step, and Eleanor's boots slipped on wet stone and pine needles. Her father's coat, heavy with rain, clung to her like a shroud. She had been climbing for hours, maybe longer. Time lost meaning in the darkness that was both eternal and immediate. The storm had passed, leaving behind a bitter cold that cut through her wet clothes like knives. She paused, pressing her back against what felt like a massive pine trunk, its bark rough and resinous. Her breath came in ragged gasps that echoed in the thin mountain air. Below her, far below, she could no longer hear any sounds of pursuit. Perhaps they hadn't discovered her absence yet. Perhaps Samuel was too drunk to notice. Perhaps her mother had convinced them she'd died in the storm. Eleanor pushed away that last thought. She couldn't think of her mother now, not if she wanted to survive. The path, if it could even be called that anymore, had dissolved into a treacherous scramble over roots and rocks. She moved by instinct, her hands reading the forest like a book written in bark and stone. The moss grew thick on the north faces of the trees, just as her father had taught her. She kept it to her left, moving steadily east and up. A wolf howled somewhere in the distance, answered by another, then another. Eleanor's hand went to the knife at her belt, though she knew it would be little use against a pack. The sound raised primitive fears in her chest, but she forced herself to keep moving. Stillness meant death up here, from cold if not from fangs. Her foot caught on a root, sending her sprawling. She landed hard, her palms scraped raw on granite, the contents of her bundle scattering. Frantically, she felt around in the pine needles and dirt, finding the leather pouch with her grandmother's ring. A few coins, but the food she'd grabbed, gone, rolled away down some unseen slope. "No," she whispered, the first word she'd spoken since leaving her mother. Her voice sounded strange in the mountain silence, small and lost. She gathered what she could find and pressed on. Hunger already gnawed at her belly, but thirst was the more immediate concern. She could hear water somewhere to her right, a stream tumbling over rocks. She made her way toward it carefully, aware that one misstep could send her tumbling into some rocky chasm. The stream was icy cold, fed by snowmelt from the peaks above. Eleanor drank deeply, then splashed her face, gasping at the shock of it. She filled her mother's small water flask, her numb fingers fumbling with the cork. As she knelt by the stream, she heard it, a sound that didn't belong, the soft chuff of breath. Too big to be any forest creature she knew. Bear. Her father had told her about the grizzlies that roamed these mountains, massive and unpredictable. Eleanor froze, her hand on her knife hilt. The breathing came again, closer now. She could smell it, rank fur, fish, wildness. Slowly, so slowly, she backed away from the stream. A branch cracked under her foot, and the breathing stopped. Then came the roar, so loud and close it seemed to shake the mountain itself. Eleanor turned and ran, crashing through underbrush, branches tearing at her clothes and hair. Behind her, she heard the bear crashing through the forest, gaining ground. Her foot found empty air where she expected earth. She was falling, tumbling down a steep slope in a cascade of pine needles and small stones. She hit something hard, a tree trunk, that knocked the breath from her lungs, then continued rolling until she slammed into a boulder at the bottom of a ravine. Pain shot through her ribs, and she tasted blood where she'd bitten her tongue. Above her, she heard the bear's frustrated huffing as it decided the chase wasn't worth the effort. Eleanor lay still, every part of her body screaming in pain, waiting until the forest sounds returned to normal. When she tried to stand, her ankle buckled, not broken, she thought, but badly twisted. Using a fallen branch as a crutch, she limped along the ravine, searching for shelter. The cold was seeping into her bones now, her wet clothes stealing what little warmth her body could generate. She almost missed the overhang, a shallow cave beneath a massive boulder, just deep enough to provide shelter from the wind. Eleanor crawled inside, her body shaking violently from cold and exhaustion. She pulled her father's coat tighter, but it provided little comfort. The night stretched on, endless and brutal. Eleanor drifted in and out of consciousness, her body burning with fever one moment and shaking with chills the next. She dreamed of her mother's warm hands, of soup bubbling on the stove, of her father's voice telling stories by the fire. Dawn came slowly, seeping through the forest canopy in shades of gray she could sense rather than see. Eleanor tried to move and found her limbs stiff as boards. Her ankle had swollen during the night, and her stomach cramped with hunger. She had to move. Death would come quickly if she stayed here, curled in this cave like a wounded animal. Using her makeshift crutch, she pulled herself upright and began to walk, each step an agony. The day blurred into a haze of pain and determination. She found late berries on a bush, ate them despite not being certain what they were. Her stomach rebelled, but she kept them down through sheer will. She drank from streams when she found them, refilled her flask. By the second night, she was delirious. The fever had returned with vengeance, and her injured ankle had become a constant, throbbing agony. She collapsed beside a fallen log, no longer caring about shelter or safety. The mountains had won. She would die here, alone and unmourned. Just another fool who'd challenged the wilderness and lost. She didn't hear the footsteps at first, lost as she was in fevered dreams, but then a hand touched her forehead. Rough, calloused, but gentle. She tried to speak but could only manage a croak. "Easy there," a voice rumbled, deep as the mountain itself. "Don't try to talk." Strong arms lifted her as if she weighed nothing. Eleanor's head lolled against a chest that smelled of wood smoke and leather. She was moving, being carried, but she couldn't seem to care where or by whom. "Fool girl," the voice muttered. "What were you thinking, coming up here alone?" Eleanor wanted to explain about Pike, about being sold like cattle, about choosing the mountain's judgment over man's cruelty. But the words wouldn't come. She was falling again, but this time into a darkness softer than night. She woke to warmth and the crackling of fire. For a moment, she thought she was home, that the whole terrible adventure had been a fever dream. But the smells were wrong. Pine smoke instead of coal, cured pelts instead of her mother's lavender water. "You're awake." The same deep voice. Closer now. "Good. Thought I might have wasted my effort hauling you here." Eleanor tried to sit up, but firm hands pressed her back down. "Rest. You've been out for 2 days. The fever broke this morning." "Who?" Her voice was a whisper, throat raw. "Name's Silas Thorne. This is my place." A cup was pressed to her lips. Some kind of herb tea, bitter but soothing. "Found you half dead up on the North Ridge. What's a blind girl doing alone in these mountains?" Eleanor stiffened. Even here, even half dead, she was still the blind girl first, person second. "Running," she managed. "From what?" She turned her face away. "Men who would buy me." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the fire's voice and the wind outside. Finally, Silas grunted. "Well, you nearly bought yourself a grave instead. These mountains don't forgive foolishness. Better than being sold." Another silence, longer this time, then the creak of a chair as he stood. "Maybe so," he said quietly. "Rest now. We'll see about that ankle when you're stronger." As his footsteps moved away, Eleanor pulled the rough blanket closer. She was alive, against all odds, in the home of a stranger who could be friend or foe. But for now, for this moment, she was warm and safe, and that was enough. Outside, the wind howled through the peaks, carrying the scent of snow and pine and freedom still beyond her reach. But she had made it this far. She had chosen the mountain's judgment and survived its first test. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers. But tonight, by a stranger's fire, in a shelter she couldn't see but could feel in every board and beam, Eleanor allowed herself one small moment of victory. She was no longer the blind bride waiting to be sold. She was Eleanor of the mountains now, and she would find her way. The days that followed blurred together like watercolors in rain. Eleanor drifted between sleep and wakefulness, her body fighting to heal while her mind struggled to map this new world. The cabin, for that's what it was, she determined from the sounds, was small but solid, built to withstand mountain winters. She could hear the logs settling, the wind testing the chinking between them. Silas Thorne moved about his space with the careful efficiency of a man long accustomed to solitude. His footsteps were heavy but purposeful, never wasted. He spoke little, and when he did, his voice carried the rumble of distant thunder. On the third morning, Eleanor felt strong enough to sit up properly. She heard him stirring something over the fire. From the smell, it was the same bitter tea he'd been feeding her. "My ankle," she said, testing her voice. "Is it broken?" "No. Bad sprain. I've wrapped it." He moved closer, and she could feel the heat radiating from him, smell the mixture of wood smoke and pine pitch that seemed to cling to everything here. You were lucky. Could have been much worse, the way you were stumbling around. Eleanor's hands explored the rough blanket, the straw-filled mattress beneath her. This is your bed. Where have you been sleeping? Floor's good enough? His tone suggested the conversation was over, but Eleanor pressed on. I should leave. You've done enough. With that ankle? In winter? He snorted. These mountains would chew you up and spit out your bones come spring. I can't stay here. The words came out more desperate than she'd intended. I can't be dependent on another man's charity. The silence stretched so long she wondered if he'd left. Then, charity's got nothing to do with it. I don't leave wounded creatures to die, human or otherwise. When you can walk, when the pass is clear, you can go wherever you please. He set something down beside her. A bowl. From the sound and smell. Rabbit stew. Eat. Eleanor found the spoon and ate slowly, savoring the first real food she'd had in days. It was simple fare. Rabbit, wild onions, some kind of root vegetable. But to her starved body, it might as well have been a feast. Why do you live up here alone? She asked between bites. Same reason you're running. I expect world down there's got too many people with too many opinions about how others should live. She heard him move to the other side of the cabin, the scrape of metal on wood, knife on wet stone. She realized, the rhythm steady and practiced. You haven't asked, she said quietly, about my eyes. The sharpening stopped. Figure if you wanted to tell me, you would. Fever. When I was 4. Woke up to darkness and never left it. The sharpening resumed. Must be hard. Eleanor almost laughed. Everyone said that, usually with pity dripping from their words like honey from a broken comb. But Silas said it matter of fact, like commenting on weather or the price of flour. It's what I know, she said. The hard part is how others see it, or don't see me at all, just the blindness. The sound was non-committal, but she sensed understanding in it. Days passed in this fashion. Eleanor's strength returned slowly, and with it came restlessness. She couldn't simply lie abed while he worked. When Silas left to check his trap lines, she explored the cabin by touch, memorizing its dimensions, its contents. It was Spartan but clean. A single room with a fireplace at one end, the bed against another wall, a rough table and 2 chairs in the center. Shelves held supplies. She could smell flour, salt, dried herbs. Pelts hung from the rafters, soft against her searching fingers. When Silas returned that evening, he found her standing by the table, having managed to hobble that far using the wall for support. You'll tear that wrapping off, he warned, but there was something like approval in his voice. I can't lie still anymore. I need to be useful. He was quiet for a moment. Then, can you work by feel? There's pelts need scraping. And so began an odd partnership. Eleanor worked with the pelts while Silas went about his trapping. He taught her to feel for the remaining fat and flesh, to scrape with steady pressure. Her hands, soft from years of only household work, blistered and bled. But she didn't complain. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, not quite comfortable with each other, but no longer complete strangers. Sometimes Silas would work on his equipment. She could hear him mending traps, sharpening knives, patching leather. Sometimes he read from one of his few books, his voice rolling over the words like river water over stones. You can read? Eleanor asked one night, surprised. My mother insisted, said even mountain men needed letters. There was an old pain in his voice, quickly buried. Doesn't matter now. Eleanor wanted to ask about his mother, about why he'd chosen this isolated life, but she'd learned that Silas gave information like a miser gave coins, rarely and grudgingly. One morning, she woke to find him placing something beside her. Made these for you, he said gruffly. Can't have you stumbling around in those torn town boots. Eleanor's hands explored the gift. Moccasins, soft leather with thick soles, lined with rabbit fur. They fit perfectly. How did you know the size? Measured while you were fevered. Figured you'd need proper footwear if you meant to stay mobile. The kindness of it caught in her throat. Thank you. He grunted and moved away, uncomfortable with gratitude, as her ankle healed. Eleanor ventured outside, always with Silas nearby. He taught her the immediate area around the cabin, where the wood pile stood, the path to the creek, the flat stone he used for butchering. She learned to navigate by landmark and sound, building a map in her mind. "You're different than I expected," she said one day as they sat outside, weak winter sun on their faces. "How's that? When I first woke here, I was afraid you might be like the men I was running from." Silas was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rougher than usual. "I've got no use for men like that. Man who'd buy a woman like property isn't a man at all. Yet you keep me here. Door's not barred. You can leave whenever you're ready to survive on your own." He paused. "Though I'd rather you waited for spring. These mountains are unforgiving in winter." Eleanor pulled her father's coat closer. She told Silas about the coat, about her father's death, but not about her mother. That wound was too fresh. "I know about the grizzlies now," she said with a rueful smile. "Met one my second night." "You met one and lived? Lucky or stupid, not sure which." "Both, probably." She heard what might have been a chuckle, the first she'd heard from him. That night, a blizzard struck with fury. The wind screamed like a living thing, and snow piled against the cabin walls. They brought in extra wood, banking the fire high. Even so, the cold crept through every chink and crack. "This is just the beginning," Silas warned. "Winter up here isn't like in the valleys. It's a siege. You survive by preparing and persevering." Eleanor listened to the storm's rage and felt a strange peace. Down in Willow Creek, she'd have been married to Pike by now, trapped in a different kind of winter. Here, despite the danger and uncertainty, she was free to face the storm as herself. "Tell me about trapping," she said, partly to distract from the howling wind and partly from genuine interest. So Silas talked, more than she'd ever heard him speak, about reading animal signs, about the patience required, about respecting the creatures that gave their lives for his survival. His voice painted pictures her eyes couldn't see. Fox tracks in fresh snow, the way a rabbit's trail doubled back, how beaver dams changed the flow of streams. "You see the forest differently than most," Eleanor observed. "How would you know how I see?" But there was no sting in it. "Because you describe it like someone who truly looks, not just glances. Most people with sight waste it." Silence fell between them, comfortable now. The fire popped and settled. The storm raged on. And Eleanor felt something shift in the cabin's atmosphere. Not attraction, not yet, but recognition. Two damaged souls who'd found shelter in the same port. "I had a wife once," Silas said suddenly, the words falling like stones into still water. "And a daughter. The cholera took them 6 winters back." Eleanor held her breath, afraid any response would stop the flow of words. "Came back from a hunting trip to find them already buried. The whole settlement, gone. After that, couldn't stand being around people anymore. Their sympathy felt like chains." He poked at the fire. "So I came up here. Been here since." "I'm sorry," Eleanor whispered. "Long time past. But sometimes, in storms like this, I remember Anna's laugh, little Mary's hands reaching for my beard." His voice caught. "Ghosts are heavy company." Eleanor understood. Her own ghosts, her father, her mother, was she gone now? The not knowing gnawed at her, whispered in quiet moments, "Maybe that's why you saved me," she said softly. Not charity, but understanding. One ghost recognizing another. Silas didn't answer, but she heard him shift in his chair. After a moment, he cleared his throat. "Your ankle's nearly healed. Come spring, I'll teach you the trails. If you want, proper woodcraft. Might serve you well, wherever you end up." It was an offer of time, of choice. Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice. The storm raged for 3 days. They fell into deeper rhythms, sharing meals, working side by side, talking more freely. Eleanor learned that Silas carved in the evenings, his hands shaping wood into useful objects. He learned that she knew herbs, had helped Doc Morrison before her stepfather put a stop to it. On the 3rd night, as the blizzard finally began to exhaust itself. Eleanor found herself laughing at something, a story Silas told about a particularly clever fox that had outwitted him for months. The sound surprised them both. "Haven't heard laughter in this cabin for 6 winters," Silas said quietly. "Haven't had much cause for it myself." Eleanor replied, but something had shifted between them, subtle as spring's first thaw. Not love, not yet, but possibility. In the morning, they would dig out from the storm, return to the careful dance of 2 solitary souls learning to share space. For now, though, they sat by the fire while winter raged outside, no longer quite so alone in their darkness. The winter deepened, and with it came a rhythm Eleanor had never known in her valley life. She woke to the sound of Silas building up the fire, worked through the day preparing pelts or mending gear, and fell asleep to the settling of logs and the distant howl of wolves. Her hands grew calloused but clever, learning the textures of mountain life, the difference between beaver and fox fur, the grain of different woods, the feel of well-tanned leather. "Your hands are learning to see," Silas observed one morning as she sorted pelts by touch alone. His own hand brushed hers as he passed her another bundle, and Eleanor felt something spark between them, brief as lightning, just as startling. She pulled back, confused by the sensation. "My father used to say that, said blind folks just see with different eyes." "Smart man." Silas moved away, but she could hear the slight quickening of his breath. He'd felt it too. That unexpected current. They were sharing the noon meal, venison stew and hard biscuits, when Silas spoke again. "Spring's still 2 months off, maybe more, but the teaching should start now, while snow's on the ground, easier to track, to understand the forest's patterns." Eleanor set down her spoon carefully. "You do that? Teach me woodcraft?" "Said I would. I keep my word." So began Eleanor's true education in mountain survival. Each clear day, they ventured out together. Silas taught her to feel the subtle differences in snow, fresh powder versus old crust, the dimples that marked small game trails, the deeper compressions of deer paths. He showed her how to identify trees by bark texture and branch patterns, how to find her direction by wind and slope. "Close your eyes," Eleanor said one day, amused. "What?" "Close them. Try navigating like I do." She heard him grunt, but comply. Then his uncertain footsteps, a muffled curse as he walked into a low branch. "The world's different in darkness," she said. "You have to trust other senses. Here." She reached for his hand, meaning only to guide him, but the contact sent that strange warmth through her again. "Feel how the wind shifts when we're near the big pines? Hear how the snow sounds different under the canopy?" His hand was rough, twice the size of hers, but gentle in her grasp. "I hear it," he said, voice oddly strained. They stood there, hand in hand in the winter forest, both pretending the contact was merely practical. Finally. Silas cleared his throat and stepped back. "We should check the trap line." But something had shifted between them, subtle as tracks in fresh snow. That evening, as Eleanor worked on a rabbit hide, she heard Silas carving by the fire. The sound had become familiar, the steady whisper of knife on wood, occasionally punctuated by his satisfied grunt or frustrated sigh. "What are you making?" she asked. "Nothing much," but there was an evasiveness in his tone that piqued her curiosity. She returned to her work, but her mind wandered. In the weeks since her arrival, she'd mapped not just the cabin, but the man who inhabited it. She knew his morning routine, could predict his moods by the weight of his footsteps. She'd learned that he hummed tunelessly while cooking, that he favored his left shoulder on cold mornings, that he sometimes spoke to his dead wife and daughter in his sleep. These intimacies should have frightened her. Instead, they felt like glimpses of sunlight through forest canopy, rare, precious, illuminating. "I need to ask you something," Silas said suddenly. "About those men, the ones you were running from?" Eleanor's hand stilled on the pelt. "What about them?" "They might come looking. Men like that don't like losing what they think they've bought." The thought had haunted her dreams, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. "They think I died in the storm. Surely, a blind girl couldn't survive the mountains." "Maybe, But come spring, when the pass is clear, he trailed off. But she understood. Spring would bring more than snowmelt. I won't bring trouble to you, Eleanor said firmly. When the snow melts, I'll move on. To where? His voice carried an edge she hadn't heard before. You think there's some place those men won't think to look? You think any town in 100 miles won't send word if a blind girl shows up alone? Eleanor's cheeks burned. Then what would you have me do? Hide here forever? I didn't say. He stopped, frustrated. She heard him stand, pace to the window. I'm trying to think practical. You need a plan better than just running. I had a plan. The mountains. Let them judge me on my merits, not my eyes. The mountains near killed you. But they didn't. I'm here. I survived. Barely. Still counts. Despite the tension, she heard what might have been amusement in his exhale. Stubborn woman. Stubborn man. They lapsed into silence. But it wasn't comfortable anymore. The question of spring hung between them like smoke from green wood, acrid and inescapable. Later that night, Eleanor lay wakeful, listening to Silas's breathing from his pallet by the fire. She'd grown accustomed to the sound, found comfort in it. The thought of leaving, of facing the world alone again, sat like ice in her stomach. But worse was the thought of bringing danger to him. He'd saved her life, given her shelter, taught her skills no one had ever bothered to teach the blind girl. She couldn't repay that by leading Pike and his ilk to Silas's door. She must have made some sound. A sigh, perhaps because Silas stirred. Can't sleep? Thinking too much. About spring. About debts I can't repay. She heard him sit up, the rustle of his blankets. Told you before, this isn't charity. Don't make it about debts. Then what is it? The question escaped before she could stop it. Long silence. The fire popped, sending up a shower of sparks she couldn't see but could hear. Damned if I know, he admitted quietly. Started as one thing, man helping someone in need. But now, Eleanor held her breath, waiting, but he didn't continue. After a moment, she heard him lie back down. Sleep, Eleanor. Tomorrow we're checking the high traps. Long day ahead. But sleep didn't come easily to either of them. The next morning brought clear skies and bitter cold. They moved through the forest in companionable silence. Eleanor following the sound of Silas's footsteps, occasionally reaching out to touch a tree trunk for bearing. She'd learned to read the forest's braille, the story written in bark and branch, stone and stream. At the third trap, they found a fox, its red fur brilliant even to Eleanor's fingers. Beautiful pelt, Silas murmured. This'll trade well come spring. Spring, always spring, looming like a mountain storm. As Silas reset the trap, Eleanor heard something that made her freeze. Horses, distant yet, but moving up the valley. Silas, she whispered. He was beside her instantly. I hear them. 2, maybe 3 horses, moving slow. Could be anyone, Eleanor said, but her heart raced. Could be, but he was already gathering their gear, his movements quick and quiet. Back to the cabin. Stay close. They moved swiftly through familiar territory, Eleanor's hand occasionally brushing Silas's coat for guidance. The cabin appeared. She knew by the change in wind, the smell of old smoke, and Silas guided her inside. Stay here, he commanded, reaching for his rifle. Silas, stay. His hand touched her cheek, so briefly she might have imagined it. Bar the door behind me. He was gone before she could protest. Eleanor stood in the darkness of the cabin, every sense straining. She heard Silas moving outside, taking position. The horses were closer now, their approach steady but cautious. Voices carried on the thin mountain air. Eleanor pressed her ear to a gap in the logs. Told you this was pointless. A younger voice, complaining. No one could survive up here. Pike doesn't pay us to think. Another man, older, harder. He says check every trapper's cabin in these mountains. We check. Eleanor's blood turned to ice. Pike. He'd sent men after her. Someone's home, the first voice said. Smoke from the chimney. Then we ask polite-like. And if they haven't seen her, we move on. She heard Silas step into view, the crunch of his boots on snow, the metallic click of a rifle being prominently displayed. "Gentlemen," he called, his voice carrying that deep rumble of potential thunder. "You're a fair piece from any trail. Lost?" "Looking for someone," the older voice replied. "Girl went missing from Willow Creek. Blind girl, about 19. Family's worried sick." Eleanor almost laughed at that. Family. As if Samuel had ever seen her as anything but a burden to be sold. "Haven't seen anyone," Silas replied evenly. "Don't get many visitors up here, blind or otherwise. Mind if we look around? Warm up by your fire? It's been a cold ride." "I do mind. Actually, man's home is private, but there's a hunting shack about 2 miles north. You're welcome to use that." Tension stretched between them like a bowstring. Eleanor found herself holding her breath. Finally, the older man spoke. "We'll be checking all the cabins hereabouts, if you happen to remember seeing anyone." "I'll surely forget just as quick," Silas said, and there was iron in his voice now. "Have a safe journey. Gentlemen, these mountains can be treacherous for those who don't know them." The threat was polite but unmistakable. Eleanor heard muttered conversation, then the slow retreat of horses. Silas didn't return immediately. She knew he was watching, making sure they truly left. When he finally entered, bringing a swirl of cold air, Eleanor was trembling. "They're gone," he said, "but they'll be back. Men like that always come back." "I'm sorry," Eleanor whispered. "I've brought trouble to your door, just as you warned." "Our door," he corrected absently, then seemed to realize what he'd said. He busied himself with the rifle, but Eleanor had heard the slip. "I should leave tonight. Lead them away." "Don't be foolish." His voice was rough. "You wouldn't make it a mile in the dark and cold, and they'd track you easy in fresh snow." "Then what?" He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his words were careful. "There's an old trapper's trail leads over the high pass, comes out near the railroad. 2 valleys over, snow's too deep now, but come late spring, when it melts but before the rivers run too high, you'd help me get away." It wasn't a question. "If that's what you want." Eleanor heard what he didn't say. "If that's what you want. Not what I want." The realization sat warm in her chest, dangerous as spring ice. "Is it what you want?" she asked softly. Instead of answering, he crossed to where she stood. She felt the heat of him, smelled wood smoke and leather and something indefinable that was purely Silas. His hand rose to her face, fingers careful as if she might spook like a wild creature. "This is foolishness," he muttered, but his thumb traced her cheekbone with aching gentleness. "The worst kind." Eleanor agreed, but she leaned into his touch anyway. For a moment, they stood suspended like that, his hand cradling her face, her darkness filled with the sound of his breathing. Then voices carried on the wind, distant but distinct, the searchers, making camp at the shack he'd mentioned. Silas stepped back, his hand falling away. "They'll watch the cabin now. We need to be careful." Eleanor nodded, though her skin still burned where he'd touched her. Everything had changed in that moment. The careful balance they'd maintained shattered like ice in spring sun. And like spring itself, there would be no stopping what came next, for good or ill. Outside, night fell early and complete. Inside, 2 people sat by the fire, closer than before but further apart, each wrestling with feelings as dangerous as any mountain storm. The fox pelt lay forgotten on the table, its red fur catching the firelight like a premonition of the passion and blood that spring would surely bring. The days that followed were tense as drawn bowstrings. Eleanor could feel Silas's watchfulness in every movement, hear it in the way he checked and rechecked the door bar each night. The searchers had made camp at the hunting shack 2 miles north, their presence a constant weight on both their minds. "They're testing us," Silas said one morning, peering through the frosted window. "Smoke from their fire's been steady 3 days now. They're waiting to see if we slip up." Eleanor continued working on the rabbit hide. her fingers steady despite her inner turmoil. How long before they give up? Men like that? When they're being paid? He didn't finish the thought. She'd learned to move silently around the cabin, staying away from windows, speaking only in whispers. It felt like being blind twice over, trapped by darkness and by the threat lurking outside. The walls that had once meant safety now felt like a cage. That night, another blizzard struck with sudden fury. The wind howled like a living thing, driving snow horizontal, visibility dropping to nothing. Eleanor sat by the fire, listening to the storm's rage, when Silas suddenly tensed. "What is it?" she whispered. "Thought I heard—" He moved to the door, listening. Then she heard it too, someone pounding on wood, desperate and continuous. "The shack," Silas muttered. "Something's wrong." The pounding came again, carried on the wind. Eleanor could hear desperation in its rhythm. "They'll die," she said quietly, "if their shelter's compromised in this storm." Silas cursed under his breath. She could feel his internal struggle. These men were hunting Eleanor, but the mountain code was clear. You didn't leave anyone to die in a blizzard, enemy or not. "Stay here," he commanded, reaching for his heavy coat. "Keep the fire high. I may be bringing them back." "Silas." "I know." His hand found hers in the darkness, squeezed once. "Trust me." Then he was gone into the howling white chaos. Eleanor built up the fire and set water to heat, her movements automatic while her mind raced. If Silas brought the searchers here, if they saw her— Time crawled. The storm raged louder, and she could no longer hear any human sounds over its fury. Had Silas made it to the shack? Were they all lost in the white death outside? Finally, an eternity later, the door burst open. Silas stumbled in, supporting another man, both caked with snow. "Get blankets," Silas barked. Eleanor moved quickly, gathering what they needed. The shack roof collapsed. Other one didn't make it. Beam caught him. The surviving searcher was young, maybe 20, teeth chattering uncontrollably. Eleanor stayed back, keeping her face averted, letting her hair fall forward as she passed supplies to Silas. Thank you," the young man stammered through blue lips. "Would have died sure enough. Anyone would have done the same," Silas said gruffly, working to get the man's frozen boots off. "What's your name? Son?" Tom Garrett." Eleanor recognized the voice, the younger one who'd complained about the pointless search. She busied herself making hot tea, staying in the shadows. "Your partner?" Silas asked. "Jake's dead. Roof beam came down right on him." Tom's voice broke. "I tried to dig him out, but the snow, it kept coming. Nothing you could have done. Mountains take who they want." Eleanor brought the tea, keeping her head down, moving with the shuffling gait of an old woman. Tom was too focused on the warmth to pay her much attention. "Your mother?" Tom asked Silas, accepting the cup gratefully. "Something like that." Silas replied. Eleanor heard the warning in his tone. They got Tom settled by the fire, wrapped in blankets. The young man fell into exhausted sleep almost immediately. Eleanor and Silas retreated to the far corner of the cabin. "What now?" she whispered. "Now we wait out the storm. Come morning, we deal with what comes. He'll recognize me. Maybe not. You've changed. Thinner, moving different. And he's not expecting to find you here, tending fire like you belong." Eleanor wasn't convinced, but there was nothing to do but wait. She returned to her work, keeping her face always angled away from their guest. Silas maintained his vigil, rifle close at hand, deep in the night. Tom stirred, crying out. Eleanor moved instinctively to help, then caught herself. But Silas was already there, holding the young man's shoulders as he thrashed. "Easy, son. You're safe. The beam, Jake." "I couldn't— I know. Eleanor heard grief in Silas's voice. Old grief, weathered but not forgotten. He understood the weight of survivor's guilt. Tom's breathing steadied. "You ever lose someone? Someone you were supposed to protect?" "Yes," Silas said simply. "Does it get easier?" "No, you just learn to carry it." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. She thought of her mother, wondered if she still lived, if she blamed Eleanor for abandoning her. The not knowing was its own kind of grief. The storm began to die near dawn. Tom slept fitfully while Silas and Eleanor maintained their quiet watch. As gray light filtered through the windows, Eleanor knew their respite was ending. Tom woke slowly, disoriented. Then memory returned, and with it, purpose. His eyes sharpened, scanning the cabin properly for the first time. "I should thank you proper," he said, sitting up. "You saved my life." "Mountain code." Silas replied, "You'd have done the same." Tom's gaze found Eleanor, who was tending the fire with her back to him. "Ma'am, I'm grateful for your kindness, too." Eleanor nodded but didn't turn or speak. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "I should tell you," Tom continued, addressing Silas, "why we were here, looking for a girl. Blind girl. Run off from Willow Creek." "You mentioned," Silas said neutrally. "Thing is," Tom shifted uncomfortably, "I knew her some. Eleanor Mason. Wasn't right. What they planned for her, selling her off like cattle." Eleanor's hand stilled on the poker. "That so?" Silas's voice was carefully controlled. "Jake, he was all for the money Pike promised, but me," Tom sighed. "My sister was born simple-minded. I seen how folks treat those who are different. Eleanor never did harm to nobody, just wanted to live quiet-like. Then why hunt her? Pike's money was good, and times are hard. But if I'm honest," Tom's voice dropped, "part of me hoped we wouldn't find her. Hoped she made it somewhere safe." Eleanor turned slowly. Tom's eyes widened as he took in her face properly for the first time. "Eleanor," he breathed. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze with her sightless eyes. "Hello, Tom?" For a moment, nobody moved. Then Tom laughed, a short, wondering sound. "I'll be damned. You did make it." Silas had tensed, hand moving toward his rifle, but Tom held up both palms. "Peace, Mr. Thorne. I got no quarrel here." He looked between them, understanding dawning. "You're together, you and her? She's under my protection," Silas said carefully. "More than that, from the look of things." Tom stood slowly, mindful of Silas's watchfulness. "I got a decision to make, don't I?" Eleanor stepped forward. "Tom, I remember you from town. You were kind when others weren't, but I can't go back, won't go back. Pike won't stop looking. Man like that doesn't like being thwarted." "Then Pike will have to learn disappointment," Silas said flatly. Tom studied them both, then nodded slowly. "Jake's dead. Terrible tragedy. When I barely made it back to town, I'll report that we found no sign of the girl, must have perished in the mountains, like everyone figured." "Why?" Eleanor asked softly. Tom gathered his dried clothes, his movements careful and deliberate. "Because my sister deserves a world where different doesn't mean less than... Because you deserve what everyone else gets, a chance to choose your own path." He moved to the door, then paused. "But Pike's not the giving up kind. He'll send others come spring. You might want to be elsewhere by then. We'll take that under advisement," Silas said. Tom looked back at Eleanor one last time. "You know, seeing you here, seeing how you move around this place like you were born to it, maybe you weren't running away at all. Maybe you were running towards something." Then he was gone, trudging through the fresh snow toward town and whatever story he'd tell when he got there. Eleanor stood frozen until she heard Silas bar the door. Then her knees buckled. He caught her before she fell, pulled her against his chest. "It's all right," he murmured into her hair. "You're safe." He could change his mind, could tell Pike. He won't. Silas sounded certain. Boy's got honor, more than most. Eleanor pressed her face into his shirt, breathing in his familiar scent. "I was so frightened." "I know." His arms tightened around her. "So was I." She pulled back slightly. "You? Frightened? Terrified?" His hand came up to cup her cheek. "Not of them finding you, of losing you." The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Eleanor reached up, her fingers finding the rough planes of his face, reading the truth there. "Silas, I know this is complicated." She silenced him by pressing her fingers to his lips. "Everything's complicated, but what I feel when you touch me, this is simple." He made a sound low in his throat. Then his mouth found hers. The kiss was careful at first, as if they were both learning a new language. Then Eleanor's hands tangled in his hair, and careful became something else entirely. Desperate, necessary, inevitable. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Silas rested his forehead against hers. "Spring's coming," he said roughly. "Decisions to make." "Yes," Eleanor agreed, "but not today." Outside, the world lay clean and white and new under fresh snow. Inside, two people held each other by the dying fire, no longer pretending that what was between them could be ignored or reasoned away. The storm had passed, but another was building, one that would test them both when the mountain passes cleared and the larger world came calling again. For now, though, in the warm circle of Silas's arms, Eleanor felt something she hadn't expected to find in her flight to the mountains. She felt home. The false spring came early that year, a week of warm winds that set the icicles dripping and turned the top layer of snow to slush. Eleanor knew better than to trust it. Silas had taught her the mountain's moods, how winter played tricks before tightening its grip again. But even knowing it was temporary, she couldn't help but stand in the doorway, feeling the warm air on her face. "Fool's spring," Silas muttered, checking his trap lines. "Makes the animals careless, makes people careless too." He'd been on edge since Tom Garrett's visit 2 weeks prior. Every unexplained sound made him reach for his rifle. He'd taken to sleeping lighter, rising several times each night to check the perimeter. Eleanor understood his caution, but the constant vigilance was wearing on them both. That morning, as she worked on mending one of his shirts, she heard it first, horses approaching from the east trail, different from before, more of them. "Silas," she called softly. He was beside her instantly, listening. 4, maybe 5 riders, moving with purpose. Eleanor's hands found his. Tom wouldn't have. No, but Pike might have decided to search anyway. He squeezed her fingers once, then released them. Same as before. Stay inside, stay quiet. But this time felt different. The riders weren't trying for stealth. She heard them dismount in the clearing, heard the metallic sounds of weapons being checked. "Silas Thorne," a voice called out. Not Pike's, but carrying authority. "This is Marshal William Davies from Willow Creek. I need to speak with you." Eleanor felt Silas tense beside her. A marshal meant official business, meant the law had gotten involved. "Stay here," he murmured, then stepped outside, rifle in hand but pointed downward. "Marshal," Silas acknowledged. "Long ride from town." "That it is. Mind if my men water their horses? We need to talk." Eleanor pressed against the wall, straining to hear. She caught fragments. Warrant. Questioning. Missing person. After several minutes, Silas returned. His face, she could read it now in the set of his shoulders. The sound of his breath was grim. "They want to search the cabin," he said quietly. "Have a warrant. If I refuse—" Eleanor understood. Refusing would confirm suspicions, bring more trouble. "Then let them search," she said, surprised by her own calm. "Eleanor, I'm tired of hiding. Silas, tired of jumping at shadows." She stood straighter. "Let them come." Silas was quiet for a moment. Then, "You sure?" "No, but I'm doing it anyway." He opened the door. "Marshal, you can come in. Just you." Davies entered. Eleanor could tell he was a big man from his heavy tread. Could smell tobacco and leather. He stopped short when he saw her. "Ma'am," he said carefully. "Marshal." Eleanor kept her chin high, her hands steady. "You'd be Eleanor Mason. Now I'm just Eleanor." Davies moved further into the cabin, his spurs jangling. "Your stepfather filed a report. Says you were taken against your will." says Mr. Thorne here kidnapped you. Eleanor laughed. She couldn't help it. Samuel Hartley says many things. How much did Pike pay him to say that? Ma'am, you know about Josiah Pike? Marshall? Know he tried to buy me like a brood mare? Know my stepfather took money for the transaction? Davies shifted uncomfortably. I heard rumors. Not rumors. Truth. Eleanor stepped forward. I ran because they were selling me. Marshall, Silas found me half dead in a blizzard and saved my life. If that's kidnapping, then I'm grateful for it. Miss Mason, that's not my name anymore. Her voice carried steel now. My father was James Harper. I was Eleanor Harper before my mother remarried. Mason was never mine, just another chain Samuel tried to put on me. Davies was quiet for a long moment. Then, Miss Harper, then, are you here of your own free will? More free than I've ever been. And you're unharmed. Eleanor heard what he was really asking. Marshall Davies, Silas Thorne is the first man to ever treat me as a person rather than a burden or property. Whatever story Samuel is spreading, whatever Pike is paying to have believed, they're lies. I see. Davies moved to the door, paused. Thing is, Miss Harper, your stepfather's your legal guardian until you're 21 or married. By law. By law. I'm property, Eleanor said bitterly. Like a horse or a piece of furniture. The law's the law. Silas spoke for the first time since Davies entered. Not all laws are just, Marshall. You know that well as I do. Davies sighed. Maybe so. But I've got orders. Miss Harper needs to come back to town, get this sorted proper. No. Eleanor and Silas said it simultaneously. Now, folks. Marshall, Silas said quietly. You seem like a decent man, so I'll tell you plain. Eleanor's not going anywhere she doesn't want to go, and I'll stand against any man who tries to force her. The threat hung in the air. Eleanor heard hands moving toward weapons outside. That's not a path you want to walk, Thorne. Neither is taking a woman against her will. Marshall, badge or no badge. The tension stretched taut. Then Eleanor heard something that changed everything. More horses approaching. Fast. Marshall, one of Davies' men called. Rider's coming. It's Pike and his boys. Davies cursed. Told that fool to stay in town. The new arrivals thundered into the clearing. Eleanor recognized Pike's voice immediately. The gravelly rasp that had haunted her nightmares. Davies, you find my property. Mr. Pike, I told you to let the law handle this. Law's too slow. I paid good money for that girl. Pike's voice came closer. I know she's in there. Tom Garrett might have lied, but I got other sources. Eleanor felt Silas tense beside her, ready for violence. But it was Davies who spoke, his tone sharp with authority. Mr. Pike, you'll stand down. This is a legal matter. Legal? Pike laughed, ugly and harsh. Was it legal when she ran off with money owed to me? Was it legal when this mountain trash stole my bride? I'm not your bride, Eleanor called out, surprising everyone. I'm not anyone's property. She heard Pike dismount, his boots heavy on the packed snow. There you are, girl. Time to stop this foolishness. Eleanor stepped into the doorway where he could see her. She felt exposed, vulnerable, but also strangely powerful. Look at me, Josiah Pike. Look close. Do I look like property to you? You look like a girl who's forgotten her place. No, I look like a woman who's found it. She reached back, and Silas's hand was there, warm and solid. You want to take me? You'll have to kill him first, and then me, because I'll fight you every step. Enough. Davies stepped between them. Pike, you claim this woman owes you money. You got proof, bill of sale, legal contract? Pike sputtered. Her stepfather has no legal right to sell another human being, regardless of relation. Davies turned to Eleanor. Miss Harper, you willing to swear out a complaint? Attempted trafficking's a serious charge. Eleanor felt the shift in power like a change in wind. I am Marshall. Now wait just a... Pike started forward, but his own men held him back. The Marshal's presence had changed the game. Mr. Pike, Davies said formally, I'm ordering you back to town. Any further harassment of Miss Harper or Mr. Thorne will result in your arrest. This isn't over. Pike snarled. I've got rights. You've got nothing. Silas spoke quietly, but his voice carried, You're a small man who thought he could buy what he couldn't earn. Eleanor's worth a dozen of you, and she'll never be yours or anyone else's property. Pike's face contorted with rage. His hand moved toward his gun, but froze as several rifles swung his way. Davies' men, choosing the side of law over Pike's money. Pike, Davies warned, don't be a fool. For a moment, violence trembled in the air. Then Pike spat in the snow, the gesture conveying his contempt. This isn't over, he repeated. Mountains are dangerous. Accidents happen. Is that a threat? Davies asked. Just an observation. Marshal, just an observation. He mounted his horse roughly, jerked the reins. His men followed, casting dark looks back at the cabin. They rode off in a thunder of hooves and curses. Davies waited until they were gone, then turned to Eleanor and Silas. He won't give up easy. Men like Pike, they don't like being denied. We know, Silas said. There's something else. Davies pulled out a folded paper. Message came through from Willow Creek yesterday. Mrs. Grace Mason passed 4 days ago. The consumption finally took her. Eleanor made a small sound, her knees buckling. Silas caught her, held her as she shook with silent sobs. Her mother, gone. The last tie to her old life severed. I'm sorry for your loss, Davies said quietly. For what it's worth. The doc said she went peaceful, asking for you at the end. Eleanor couldn't speak. The grief was too large, too sudden. She'd known, somehow, that her mother was gone, felt it like a severed thread, but confirmation made it real. Davies cleared his throat. With your mother's passing, there's the matter of inheritance, the cabin, such as it is. Samuel's got no claim, wasn't legally married. Turns out, your mother never signed proper papers. Through her tears, Eleanor processed this. So I'm free, legally speaking. 21 or not, you've got no guardian but yourself now. Davies tipped his hat. I'll file my report. Far as the law's concerned, you're where you choose to be, but watch yourself. Pike's got money and grudges. Bad combination. After the marshal and his men left, Silas guided Eleanor inside. She collapsed by the fire, grief and relief warring in her chest. She's gone, Eleanor whispered. I left her, and she died alone. You left to live, Silas said gently, kneeling beside her. She wanted that for you, gave you her blessing to run. I know, but it hurts. It's supposed to hurt, means she mattered. Eleanor leaned into him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. Outside, she could hear the wind picking up again, winter reasserting itself after the false spring. Pike will come back, she said eventually. Let him come. Silas's voice was grim. This is our ground. We know it. He doesn't. Our ground. Eleanor repeated softly. Despite everything, grief, fear, uncertainty, the word our glowed warm in her chest. Eleanor. Silas pulled back enough to cup her face. I'm sorry. About your mother. About all of it. She's free now, too. Eleanor said, No more pain, no more Samuel, no more consumption eating her lungs. They held each other as the light faded. As winter crept back in with teeth and claws, tomorrow would bring new challenges. Pike's threats, legal matters, decisions about the future. But tonight, in their cabin fortress against the world, they had each other. And for Eleanor, who had run to the mountains seeking freedom, that was enough. For now, true spring arrived like a benediction, melting the last stubborn patches of snow and filling the air with the sound of rushing water. Eleanor stood outside the cabin, her face tilted toward the warm sun, breathing in the scent of pine sap and new growth. The world was waking up, and with it came both promise and peril. 3 weeks had passed since Pike's threats and Marshal Davies' visit. 3 weeks of watchful quiet, of Silas teaching her to shoot by sound and instinct, of nights spent planning for contingencies they hoped wouldn't come. The false peace couldn't last. They both knew it, but for these precious days they'd pretended otherwise. "Creek's running high," Silas observed, coming to stand beside her. "Snowmelt's been heavy this year. Trail to town will be treacherous for another month at least." Eleanor heard what he didn't say. They were cut off from easy escape, but so were any who might wish them harm. The mountain was still their protector, for now. "The herbs are coming up," she said, running her fingers over the tender shoots she'd been cultivating. "Feverfew, willow bark, echinacea. By summer, we'll have good medicine stores." "Planning for summer?" There was something careful in his voice. Eleanor turned toward him, reading his mood in the way she'd learned to read the forest. "Should I not?" "I want you to." His hand found hers, but wanting and wisdom don't always align. Before Eleanor could respond, she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the peaceful morning. Horses moving fast up the eastern trail. "How many?" she asked, already knowing this wasn't a social call. "3, maybe 4. Silas's voice had gone flat. Dangerous. "Get inside. Load the rifles." But Eleanor stood her ground. "No more hiding. We face this together." He started to argue, then stopped. "Stubborn woman. You wouldn't have me any other way." Despite the tension, she heard the smile in his grunt. "True enough. Stay behind cover at least." They didn't have long to prepare. The riders burst into the clearing like a storm, Pike at the lead, face twisted with fury, accompanied by 3 hard-looking men Eleanor didn't recognize. Not locals, hired guns, from the look of them. "Thorn!" Pike bellowed. "Send out my woman, and maybe I'll let you live." "The lady's made her choice clear," Silas called back, rifle prominent but not quite aimed. "Respect it and ride on." Pike laughed, ugly and sharp. "Respect? For a blind girl and a hermit? You've got something belongs to me. Mountain man." "I belong to no one but myself," Eleanor called out, stepping where they could see her. "How many times must I say it before you understand?" "There you are. Pretty." Pike's voice turned oily. "Come on now. Stop this foolishness. You're making things harder than they need to be." "Am I?" Eleanor's hand found the pistol at her hip. Silas had been teaching her, and while she'd never be a marksman, at close range she could be deadly. "Seems to me you're the one making this hard. Josiah, I said no. That should have been the end of it." One of Pike's men shifted restlessly. "Boss, maybe we should—" "Shut up," Pike snarled. "I paid for her fair and square. She's mine by rights." "You paid my stepfather," Eleanor corrected. "A man with no right to sell what wasn't his. You bought nothing but your own delusion." Pike's face darkened further. "Big words for a blind girl. Let's see how brave you are when your protector's bleeding out." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Eleanor felt Silas tense beside her, ready for violence. But it was another voice that broke the standoff. Tom Garrett, riding hard into the clearing from the western trail. "Pike, stand down!" Tom's horse skidded to a stop between the 2 groups. "This isn't what we agreed to." "Get out of my way, boy," Pike growled. "You already failed me once. I told you she was dead." Tom insisted. "Told you to let it go. And I told you I don't like being lied to." Pike's attention split between Tom and the cabin. "Now move, or share their fate." Tom didn't move. Instead, he raised his voice. "These men you hired, Pike, they know what you really want her for. Know about your last 2 wives?" A chill ran down Eleanor's spine. "Wives?" "Both died within a year of marriage." Tom continued, his voice carrying clear. "Accidents. Pike called them. Fell downstairs. Drowned in a washtub. Convenient accidents." The hired guns exchanged glances. Whatever Pike was paying, it suddenly seemed to carry a higher cost than expected. "You shut your mouth," Pike snarled. But there was desperation in it now. "Ask anyone in Creed." Tom pressed on. "Ask them about Mary Pike, about Sarah Pike, young women who crossed him and paid for it." Eleanor felt sick. She'd known Pike was dangerous, but this— "You were going to kill me, eventually," Tom confirmed. "After he'd broken you proper. It's what he does. Finds women with no protection, no recourse. Blind girl with no family, perfect victim. That's enough." Pike went for his gun, but Silas was faster. The rifle shot echoed across the mountain, and Pike's pistol went flying, his hand bloodied. "Next one goes in your chest," Silas said calmly. Pike clutched his injured hand, rage and pain warring on his face. His hired men hadn't moved to help. Tom's revelations had changed the game. "You!" Pike pointed at Tom with his good hand. "You're dead. You know that." "Maybe," Tom agreed. "But not today. Today, you're leaving, all of you. This isn't over." "Yes, it is." Eleanor stepped fully into view, her chin high despite her racing heart. "You want to know why I ran? Josiah. It wasn't just fear, it was instinct. Something in me knew what you were, even if I couldn't name it then." She moved closer, Silas shadowing her protectively. "I may be blind, but I see you clearly now. A small, vicious man who mistakes cruelty for strength, who thinks money can buy him the right to destroy lives. You little—" "I'm not finished." Her voice carried surprising authority. "Tom, you said there were 2 wives. Were there others, women who disappeared?" Tom's silence was answer enough. Eleanor nodded slowly. "Then here's what happens. You leave now. Josiah Pike. You leave and never come back. Because if you do, if I hear you've so much as looked at another woman wrong, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what you are. You think anyone would believe a blind girl? They'll believe Marshall Davies. They'll believe the testimony I'll give, the investigation that will follow. They'll believe the pattern when they start looking for it." She paused. "How many graves would they find on your property, Josiah?" Pike went white. One of his hired guns backed his horse away. "I didn't sign up for this," the man muttered. "No one's paying you enough for this." Another agreed. They wheeled their horses and rode off, leaving Pike alone except for Tom, who still blocked his direct path to the cabin. "You've made an enemy today," Pike said, his voice low and venomous. "I made an enemy the day you decided I was property." Eleanor replied, "Today. I just made sure you knew it." Pike looked between them all. Eleanor straight-backed and defiant. Silas ready to kill. Tom blocking retreat. Something seemed to break in him, the rage collapsing into something smaller and meaner. "This isn't over," he said one more time, but the words lacked conviction. "Yes," Silas said quietly. "It is. You come near her again. I'll kill you. Simple as that. And unlike you, I don't need to hide behind accidents." Pike jerked his horse around and spurred it viciously. They watched him go, waiting until the hoofbeats faded before anyone moved. Tom dismounted slowly. "He'll be trouble for a while yet. Men like him don't give up easy." "Why?" Eleanor asked. "Why help us? You could have stayed quiet, stayed safe." Tom kicked at a patch of melting snow. "My sister, the one I mentioned. She married a man like Pike. Thought she was lucky. Man of means wanting her despite her simpleness." He paused. "She lasted 6 months. Fell down a well. They said—" "I'm sorry," Eleanor said softly. "So am I. Too late for her, but not for you." Tom mounted up again. "I'll be heading back to town. Let folks know the search is over. Official-like. Let them know Silas Thorne's woman is not to be troubled." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks at the designation, but didn't correct him. Silas's hand found hers, warm and steady. "Thank you," Silas said simply. Tom touched his hat brim. "No thanks needed. Just be happy. That's revenge enough on men like Pike." After he left, Eleanor and Silas stood in their clearing, hands linked, processing what had just happened. The sun climbed higher, warming the mountain air, and somewhere a bird began to sing. "His woman," Eleanor said finally, amusement coloring her tone. "Want me to ride after him? Correct the record?" But Silas's thumb was stroking over her knuckles, belying his casual tone. "No," Eleanor said softly. "No corrections needed." They turned back toward the cabin, but Eleanor paused, tilting her face toward the sun again. "It's really spring now. The passes will clear soon." "They will." "I could leave. Go anywhere. I'm free now. Truly free." You are. His voice was carefully neutral. Where would you go? Eleanor turned to face him fully, her hands reaching up to frame his face. Why would I go anywhere? Everything I want is right here. Eleanor, I love you. Silas Thorne. I loved you before I knew I was free to choose. Now that I can choose, I choose you. I choose this life. I choose these mountains that tested me and found me worthy. His hands covered hers, trembling slightly. You could have more. Easier life in town. Proper house. I don't want easier. I want real. I want mornings waking to your breathing and nights by the fire. I want to learn every trail and stream. I want to help with the trapping and build our stores of herbs. I want to face whatever comes knowing you're beside me. Woman. His voice was rough with emotion. You humble me. Good. Keeps you from getting too proud. But her tone was tender. He kissed her then, there in the spring sunlight with the mountains as witness. When they pulled apart, both were breathless. So we stay, he said. Build something here. Together. Together. Eleanor agreed. Though I might want to visit town sometimes. Let people see that the blind girl they all pitied is thriving. Let them see what's possible when you stop accepting the limits others put on you. Stubborn, brave woman. Silas murmured. How did I get so lucky? You opened your door in a blizzard, Eleanor said simply. Everything else followed from that single act of kindness. They walked back to the cabin hand in hand, making plans, a garden to expand, improvements to the cabin, maybe a trip to the railroad town to make their union official, though the mountains had already blessed it. Behind them, unnoticed, a figure watched from the tree line, Pike, nursing his wounded hand and wounded pride. He'd be back, when they least expected it. Men like him always came back, but for now, in the sweet spring morning, Eleanor and Silas had won their freedom. They'd stood together against those who would tear them apart and emerged stronger. The mountains had tested them both and found them worthy of each other. And in a hard land that judged harshly, that was blessing enough for any love. The morning broke clear and golden over the mountains, mist rising from the valley like spirits departing. Eleanor stood in the doorway of their cabin, truly theirs now, built stronger with new rooms added over the summer, listening to the symphony of dawn. Birds called to each other across the canopy, the creek sang its ancient song, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear Silas splitting wood for winter stores. 6 months had passed since Pike's last threat. 6 months of watchful peace. They'd gone to town twice, once to record their marriage with the circuit preacher, once to buy supplies and let Eleanor feel the shocked silence when the blind girl everyone pitied walked in on Silas Thorne's arm, confident and whole. Never thought I'd see the day. Old Mrs. Morrison had whispered, loud enough for Eleanor to hear. That poor blind child, blooming like a wildflower. Eleanor had simply smiled and purchased her goods, her movements sure and practiced. Let them whisper. Let them see that their pity had been misplaced, their assumptions wrong. Now, as autumn painted the mountains in shades she could smell and feel, the crispness of dying leaves, the earthiness of fallen pine needles. Eleanor moved through her morning tasks with quiet contentment. The herb garden had yielded well. Bundles hung drying from the rafters, filling the cabin with healing scents. Storm coming, Silas said, approaching from the wood pile. She could hear the satisfaction in his voice. They were prepared this year, truly prepared. Big one, from the feel of it. Eleanor tilted her head, sensing the pressure change he spoke of. Tonight? Tomorrow, maybe, we should bring the animals in close. They worked together through the day, securing shutters, checking supplies, bringing the chickens and goats they'd acquired into the reinforced shelter. As they worked, Eleanor heard something that made her pause. Horses on the wind, distant yet. Silas? He was already moving, hand on his rifle, but the approaching riders called out before reaching the clearing. Hello, the cabin. Tom Garrett here, with news. Eleanor relaxed slightly. Tom had visited twice since spring, bringing news from town and checking on their welfare. But something in his voice today carried urgency. He rode into the clearing with 2 other men, Marshall Davies and a stranger Eleanor didn't recognize. "Mrs. Thorne," Tom said, and Eleanor still felt a warm flutter at the name. "Silas, glad to find you both well. Tom, Marshall." Silas's voice was wary. "What brings you up here with a storm brewing? Best we talk inside," Davies said heavily. "It's about Pike." Eleanor's blood chilled, but she kept her voice steady. "What about him?" Once inside, with coffee poured, Davies delivered the news. "Pike's dead. Found him at the bottom of Widow's Canyon 3 days ago." Eleanor felt nothing at first, then a confused mix of relief and unease. "An accident?" "That's the question." The stranger spoke for the first time. "Name's Judge Samuel Carter. I'm investigating the circumstances." "Why?" Silas asked bluntly. "Man like Pike had plenty of enemies." "True enough," Carter agreed. "But he was also wealthy, and his death leaves questions. His lawyer says Pike recently changed his will, leaving everything to a woman he claimed was his lawful wife." Eleanor's hand found Silas's. "I was never his wife." "We know that," Davies assured her. "But Pike apparently told people otherwise. Said you were married by contract, that you'd run off, that he was trying to bring his wife home." "Lies," Silas growled. "Obviously," Carter said. "But lies that complicate things. There are those who might think you had reason to want Pike dead." "We haven't left this mountain in over a month," Eleanor said. "How could we—" "You couldn't," Tom interrupted. "That's why we're here, to make sure everyone knows that you were seen by the Collins family 2 days before Pike died, helping birth their baby, 20 miles from Widow's Canyon." Eleanor remembered the difficult birth, the mother's relief when her herbs had eased the pain. "Then why?" "Because Pike had friends," Davies said grimly. "Men who owed him money or favors." "They're stirring up trouble, saying Silas hired someone, saying you're both guilty of murder." "That's absurd," Eleanor snapped. "Course it is," Carter agreed. "But absurd don't mean it won't cause problems. I came to warn you, there's talk of vigilante justice, some folks getting liquored up and making threats." Silas stood abruptly. "Let them come." "No," Eleanor said firmly. "No more violence. We've had enough." She turned toward Carter's voice. "What do you need from us?" "Statement for the record, your whereabouts, any witnesses. Should be enough to satisfy the law, though it might not satisfy Pike's friends." They gave their statements, Tom and Davies witnessing. As the men prepared to leave, the storm Silas had predicted began to roll in, thunder echoing off the peaks. "Best hurry," Silas warned. "This one's going to be fierce." After they left, Eleanor and Silas stood together watching the storm approach. Lightning split the darkening sky, and the wind began to howl. "Do you think it's over?" Eleanor asked. "Truly over? Pike's dead. Can't hurt us anymore." "But his shadow remains. Those friends of his—" Silas pulled her close. "We've weathered worse storms than angry men with grudges." The storm struck with full fury that night. Rain lashed the cabin. Wind screamed through the trees, and thunder shook the mountains. But inside, by their fire, Eleanor felt safe. She'd learned that storms pass, that morning always comes, that strength isn't about sight but about seeing clearly what matters. "I'm glad he's dead," she said quietly during a lull in the thunder. "Does that make me evil? Makes you human. Man would have killed you eventual. We both know it. Still, I wanted to be better than that, better than wishing death on another." "You are better," Silas said firmly. "You gave him every chance to leave us be. His choices led to his end, not yours." Eleanor nestled closer to his warmth. Outside, the storm raged on, but she barely heard it now. Her world had shrunk to this, the circle of firelight, the solid presence of her husband, the home they'd built together. "Tell me again," she said softly, "about the sunrise." It was their ritual now. She would ask, and he would paint pictures with words, the way morning light caught on frost, how the mountains changed color with the seasons, the dance of shadows across snow. Through his eyes, she saw what her own couldn't show her, through her insights. He noticed details he'd overlooked for years. "Sun's going to break over Eagle's Peak first," he began, his voice low and warm. "It'll turn the snow pink as wild roses, then gold as honey. The mist in the valley will glow like it's lit from within." Eleanor listened, content. They'd found something rare in these harsh mountains. A love that didn't depend on sight but on truly seeing each other. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Pike's friends might come. The law might have more questions. But tonight, with the storm raging and the fire crackling, they were complete. Their cabin stood strong against the wind, built by their own hands on a foundation of trust and choice. The mountains had tested them and found them worthy, not just of survival, but of joy. And in the morning, when the storm cleared, they would stand together to face whatever came next. The blind girl who everyone said no man would take, and the mountain trapper who felt the fire beneath her quiet had written their own story, one of courage, love, and the freedom to choose their own path. The fire burned low as they settled for sleep, the storm beginning to ease, and somewhere in the darkness, Eleanor smiled. She'd run to the mountains seeking escape and found instead a home. She'd fled one kind of blindness only to discover that the clearest sight comes from the heart. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would meet it together. And that, Eleanor knew, was the greatest freedom of all. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. Where are you listening from today? I'd love to hear in the comments below and connect with fellow story lovers from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Eleanor and Silas's journey. What part of their story touched you the most?